2,000 years ago, Rome spanned continents. It covered 5 million square kilometers and maintained more than 400,000 kilometers of roads. Cities were fed by aqueducts that delivered 1 million tons of water every day. To its people, this system felt unbreakable, engineered to last forever. But beneath the marble and order, forces were at work that would undo history's greatest superpower from within. What invisible pressures could fracture something that seemed eternal? At the height of its power, Rome stretched across 3 continents, from the windswept moors of northern Britain to the deserts of Arabia, from the Atlantic shores of Spain to the lush valleys of the Nile. The empire's reach enclosed the entire Mediterranean world, binding together more than 5 million square kilometers under a single authority. This was not an abstract expanse on a map, but a living scale. Over 400,000 kilometers of roads, stone laid straight as an arrow, and engineered for centuries of use, linked distant provinces to the capital. Couriers, merchants, and soldiers moved along these arteries, carrying messages, cargo, and orders, with a speed and reliability unmatched in the ancient world. The roads were the empire's circulatory system. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, ran over 500 kilometers from Rome to the port of Brundisium, its stones worn smooth by the passage of legions and traders. Branching from it and from other great roads, a lattice of routes reached into Gaul, across the Alps, and deep into the heart of the empire's eastern provinces. Every milestone marked the distance from Rome, a reminder to travelers that no matter how far they journeyed, they remained within the orbit of the city at the center. This connective tissue was more than military infrastructure. It enabled grain from Egypt to feed the hungry millions of Rome, olive oil from Hispania to light homes in distant towns, and marble from Anatolia to adorn temples and forums. The roads also carried news of victories, disasters, new laws, and imperial decrees, binding together a population that at its peak numbered over 60 million people. The network that tied these places together made governance possible. To those living within its borders, the empire's scale felt limitless, its system of movement and control as inevitable as the rising sun. Every road, every bridge, every aqueduct was a promise of order and stability, a sign that Rome's reach was not just broad, but enduring. Within the city itself, Rome's ambition took physical form. 11 aqueducts, some stretching for over 50 kilometers, delivered more than 1 million cubic meters of fresh water every day. This steady flow powered public fountains, filled grand baths, and supplied private homes, turning the city into an oasis of abundance in the Mediterranean world. At its peak, a Roman citizen could draw water from elaborate fountains or relax in the steam of the baths of Caracalla, an architectural complex that could welcome thousands at once. Public life unfolded in spaces built for scale. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE, could seat 50,000 spectators. Its stone vaults and retractable awnings sheltered crowds from sun and rain. Gladiatorial games and public spectacles drew people from every corner of the empire, reinforcing a sense of shared identity. Nearby, the Circus Maximus stretched nearly half a kilometer, hosting chariot races for up to 200,000 onlookers. These vast arenas were more than entertainment, they were engines of civic unity, places where emperors displayed generosity and power. Industry thrived behind the scenes. Archaeological evidence points to Rome producing 80% of the world's iron and lead at its height. Blacksmiths and foundries lined the riverbanks, turning out tools, weapons, pipes, and construction materials on a scale unmatched in antiquity. Mills powered by water from the aqueducts turned grain into flour for the city's bakeries, feeding a population that may have reached 1 million. Every layer of urban life depended on systems engineered for endurance. Streets were paved and drained, sewage flowed beneath the city, and granaries stood ready to buffer against famine. These networks made Rome feel unshakable, its daily rhythms as regular as the flow of water through its arches. For generations, the city's infrastructure was not just a backdrop, but a living system, proof that Rome's order and prosperity could last forever. Between the marble arches and bustling markets of Rome, forces were gathering that would slowly erode the empire's foundation. In the 50 years following the death of Commodus in 192 CE, 26 emperors claimed the throne. few died of natural causes. Civil wars became routine, with generals buying loyalty from restless legions, only to be betrayed by rivals the next season. Each new ruler promised stability, but the rapid turnover at the top left the empire's machinery in a constant state of uncertainty. Orders from the capital carried less weight in the provinces, and the trust that once bound distant governors to Rome began to fray. The strain was not only political. Beneath the gold and marble, the Roman economy was quietly unraveling. Archaeologists sifting through coin hoards and rural estates have traced a story written in silver. The denarius, once a reliable standard, lost its value as emperors tried to solve budget crises by minting more coins with less precious metal. By the middle of the 3rd century, the silver content had dropped from around 50% to less than 5%. Merchants responded by hoarding older, purer coins, and everyday transactions shifted toward barter. Prices soared. Soldiers, whose loyalty depended on regular pay, demanded higher wages to keep pace with inflation. When the treasury could not keep up, mutinies and local rebellions followed. In the countryside, the effects of these pressures became visible in the land itself. Villa complexes in Gaul and Britannia, once centers of agricultural surplus, were abandoned or shrank to subsistence farms. Soil samples and pollen records from rural estates show a decline in cereal cultivation and export crops. By the early 5th century, estates in Gaul produced up to 30% less surplus for the markets than a century before. The tax base shrank, leaving city officials and landowners scrambling to meet imperial quotas. Some fled their posts, others bribed officials, and the burden fell heavier on those who remained. The army, once the backbone of Roman security, began to change in character as well as loyalty. Increasingly, the legions recruited from outside the empire's borders, relying on federate groups, Germanic allies settled within Roman territory, to fill the ranks. These new soldiers brought their own customs and loyalties, and their leaders expected a share of power. The old promise of citizenship in exchange for service no longer held the same appeal, and the sense of a unified Roman identity faded among the troops. The empire's defenses became more fragile, not because of a single defeat, but through the slow seep of trust and resources away from the center. What looked like strength on the surface, a vast army, a bustling city, a steady stream of coin, masked a system quietly losing its ability to adapt. The pressures were hidden, but their effects would soon become impossible to ignore. In the summer of 378 CE, the Roman army gathered outside the city of Adrianople, facing a Gothic force that had crossed the Danube 2 years earlier. Emperor Valens, pressed by political rivals and desperate for a quick victory, advanced without waiting for reinforcements. The legions drawn from distant provinces were already stretched thin by months of forced marches and short rations. Supply wagons lagged behind, slowed by broken roads and raids on the countryside. Grain shipments from Egypt and Anatolia, once reliable, had been delayed by bureaucratic confusion and the steady erosion of Rome's transport networks. On August 9th, as the midday sun beat down, the Roman lines buckled. The Goths, better fed and fighting for survival, broke through the exhausted infantry. Valens fell in the chaos, and 2/3 of his army lay dead or scattered by nightfall. The defeat at Adrianople was not just a lost battle. It was a warning that Rome's military machine, once the envy of the world, could no longer guarantee its own survival. In the decades that followed, the empire's lifelines grew even more fragile. The grain fleets that sailed from North Africa to Rome had been the backbone of the capital's food supply for centuries. But in 439 CE, the Vandals seized Carthage and its deep water ports. The loss was immediate and catastrophic. 2/3 of the grain that fed Rome's population vanished almost overnight. Records from the Senate and city prefects describe bread shortages, riots in the streets, and desperate attempts to reroute supplies from Sicily and the eastern provinces. Prices soared. The state, already strained by inflation and shrinking revenues, tried to fix prices and requisition food by force, but these efforts only deepened the crisis. For ordinary Romans, the loss of African grain meant hunger and uncertainty. For the empire, it signaled the collapse of a system that had once seemed unbreakable. These shocks, Adrianople's defeat and the loss of Africa's grain, were not isolated disasters. They were the moments when abstract pressures became lived catastrophe. A supply chain that once moved hundreds of thousands of tons of grain each year now faltered under the weight of war, corruption, and neglect. Legions that once marched on full stomachs now fought on empty ones. The promises of Rome's infrastructure, its roads, fleets, and granaries no longer held. The system that sustained the empire had begun to fray. Telling stories like these takes time, research, and a commitment to accuracy. If you value calm, well-sourced history that looks beyond the surface, subscribing is the best way to support work like this. Your support helps keep these stories alive, so we can continue exploring how even the mightiest systems are tested and sometimes undone by the pressures they face. As the empire struggled to adapt, the focus shifted from crisis management to institutional survival. The next phase would test not just Rome's armies and granaries, but the very structures that held the empire together. After centuries of building temples, baths, and forums as gifts to the city, the flow of wealth in Rome began to change. In the early 4th century, deeds and imperial edicts record a steady transfer of land and property from municipal hands to the Christian Church. Bishops became new stewards of estates once managed by civic officials, and church treasuries filled with donations that might once have funded public games or repaired aqueducts. This redistribution was not just a matter of faith, but a shift in the very structure of Roman society. Some chroniclers, like Eusebius, praised these changes as a sign of divine favor and argued that the church would care for the poor and preserve order where the old elite had failed. Others, such as Zosimus, saw a dangerous drain on the common good. He accused the new Christian hierarchy of hoarding resources, leaving city councils unable to maintain the fountains, markets, and roads that defined urban life. In cities like Milan and Rome, legal records show bishops acquiring entire urban blocks, while city curiales, once responsible for local taxes and repairs, struggled under growing fiscal pressure. The consequences rippled outward. As more land and revenue passed into church control, civic offices lost their appeal. Ambitious families redirected their energies from public service to ecclesiastical careers, chasing influence in a system that now rewarded loyalty to bishops over loyalty to the city. Constantine's legacy, shaped as much by policy as by faith, set in motion a new pattern of patronage. The old bonds of civic duty gave way to a different kind of allegiance, one that would reshape the balance of power in every Roman town. The Western Empire's story closed with a quiet gesture in 476 CE. Romulus Augustulus, a teenager more figurehead than ruler, handed over his insignia to the Germanic leader Odoacer. The formal end of imperial rule in the West echoed through chronicles, but daily life continued in the cities and fields. Laws were still enforced, taxes still collected, and old Roman habits persisted beneath new banners. In Constantinople, the empire's eastern half remained a living force. For nearly 1,000 years after the Western throne fell, emperors ruled from the shores of the Bosporus, their courts speaking Greek, but still calling themselves Romans. The Eastern Empire, later known as Byzantium, would outlast its Western twin until 1453, adapting its defenses, economy, and administration to new realities. The thread that bound these worlds together was not just power, but law. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian gathered and codified centuries of Roman statutes, producing the Corpus Juris Civilis. This legal code shaped the courts of Byzantium and, centuries later, the frameworks of Europe's civil law. Latin legal phrases, contractus, testamentum, and actus reus survive in courtrooms around the world. Linguists estimate that nearly 2/3 of core English legal terms trace their roots to Latin, and the structure of modern civil codes in places like France and Italy draws heavily from Justinian's compilation. The language of Rome, once spoken from Gaul to Judea, faded in daily conversation but endured in law, science, and the rituals of state. Political forms changed, but the imprint of Rome remained. Even as new kingdoms rose in the West, many adopted Roman systems of administration and justice, blending them with local customs. The idea of Rome, its order, its laws, its claim to universal rule, proved more enduring than any single emperor or city. This resilience, more than the drama of collapse, is the true legacy of the empire. History is shaped not only by the rise and fall of empires, but by the patient effort to understand what endures when power recedes. Months of research and careful study go into bringing stories like this to life. Every detail is checked, every claim weighed, to offer a view that honors the complexity of the past rather than reducing it to a simple lesson. If you found value in this approach, if you appreciate calm, research-driven storytelling that takes nothing for granted, consider subscribing. Your support is the reason projects like this can continue, reaching beyond the myths to the deeper patterns that shape our world. Thank you for spending your time with this reflection on Rome. The collapse of a superpower is never just a single event or a list of battles lost. It is a long process of change, full of choices, pressures, and adaptations that echo through centuries. By looking closely at how even the most powerful systems are tested and transformed, we gain perspective on the present as well as the past. Supporting this channel helps keep thoughtful history alive. Subscribing is a direct way to make sure stories like these remain possible. Thank you for watching. Empires rise on systems as much as on ambition. Today, global powers manage networks just as complex and just as vulnerable to slow, hidden strain. Rome's legacy shapes our laws and cities, but its collapse remains a warning. Permanence is an illusion built on shifting ground. Every system, no matter how vast, eventually tests the limits of its own design. Thanks for watching and for supporting thoughtful history.